Okay.
Okay, welcome to the inaugural Marom Group podcast, a new exciting tool we are launching as a professional resource for top decision makers in the nonprofit, also known as the philanthropics. You'll be able to find this podcast in conjunction with our quarterly newsletter. For those of you who are connected for the first time to Marom Group, I'm Amit Marom, founder of the group, and here with me is Dana Maman, executive director of the company. Just a little bit about us. Marom Group is a strategic consulting firm. We're based in Tel Aviv, Israel, providing cutting-edge solutions and services to key players in the philanthropic and non-profit sector. We're working worldwide. We work in the US, we work in Asia, we work in Europe, and obviously we work in Israel. And we are honored to introduce our first ever podcast guest, Dr. Paul White, co-author of the book, The 5 Languages of Appreciation in the Workplace. Dr. Paul White is a psychologist who has worked with individuals, with families, businesses, and non-profit organizations for over 25 years. He is a co-author of the best-selling 5 Languages of Appreciation in the Workplace with Dr. Gary Chapman, and 3 other books on workplace relations. He speaks internationally and provides leadership training to some of the largest multinational companies and non-profit organizations, with focus on helping make work relationships work.
So, one of the most challenging and exciting questions facing the philanthropic sector is how can professionals retain both their staff, both their employees and lay leaders? How to keep them motivated, feeling appreciated, and connected to the organization they support. Dr. White is here with us today to further discuss this topic. And we will also speak about the ever-popular topic, millennials. So, Dr. White, first of all, thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana and Amit. I'm honored to be with you today.
I would actually like to start with some conversation on your book, if you can just further explain what led you and Dr. Chapman to co-write the 5 Languages of Appreciation in the Workplace and to adapt the model to specifically workplace relations.
Sure. So Dr. Chapman wrote the 5 Love Languages, which is a tremendous book. It just celebrated its 25th year, and it sold 14 million copies, and it's in 50 languages, including Hebrew and Arabic. And so my wife and I were going through that book ourselves and found it to be quite helpful. And at the time, I'm a psychologist, and I was consulting with family-owned businesses and dealing with the relational issues of working together and passing it across generations. And so I was working with this company in North Carolina, and I talked to the father, who was the CEO, and I said, "How's this going, the transition?" And he said, it's going well. My son is stepping up and taking responsibility. I think it'll be good. I walk across the hall and ask the son the same question, and he says, "This is a disaster. It's never going to work. I can never please my father." And so, they were missing each other. And so I just thought, well, I wonder if the 5 languages could help. So I pursued Dr. Chapman for a year and finally got to meet him and, shared the idea with him. And we met, and we originally agreed to work on the online assessment tool that we've created to identify how people want to be shown appreciation. And then I started doing trainings with small groups, and it sort of grew from there, and got different experiences. And so wrote the book together and then created some training resources. So that's sort of the genesis of it, and it's gone from there to where we have over 700 trainers across the world, and I've been fortunate enough to sell 325,000 books and have 165,000 people take our online assessment. So I'm thankful for that.
That's amazing. We actually have to say that we were using your book internally in our company, and we found it extremely beneficial, and it really inspired all of us as a team. It was really a shifting point, and we loved it. So this is what led us to actually contact you and say. So I've read on your book, but I would love you to tell, what do you think are the biggest misconceptions regarding employees' motivations? what are the reasons people stay or leave their workplace?
Yeah, so there's sort of different ones in different sectors. So clearly in the for-profit world, most business owners and leaders think that paying people more money is the way to reward them or motivate them. And that's true for a very short time. Money has been shown to be a very short-term motivator. And we have lots of research. In fact, I've just rewritten the book and it's coming out in January and have a whole chapter on sort of the business case for appreciation. And we know that more money, and in fact, when you ask even the different generations, baby boomers and Gen X and so forth, they say money really isn't a motivator for them. Now, that's assuming that they're at least getting paid at a fair wage. But beyond that, it's very short term because you can get more money, but within a few weeks, even if the other issues as far as not feeling valued or included or participating in the company, that if those don't change, then getting paid more doesn't make you enjoy your work or stay there. We actually know that some research shows that 79% of the people who leave voluntarily from their workplace cite a lack of appreciation as one of the prime reasons that they leave. And part of that is because leaving a job is an emotional sort of experience. And so it takes an emotional driver to make that happen. It's usually not the only issue, but it clearly makes a big difference. And it's true for volunteers as well, and from high-level staff all the way down. So we know that probably one of the key issues is that people confuse employee recognition programs, which are sort of have proliferated to appreciation, because employee recognition is largely organizational. And it's about either how long you've been there or maybe sometimes it's performance based, but it's not personal. And people, it can work well when it's designed well, but it doesn't make individuals feel valued as a person. And I think that's part of sort of the core of what we try to communicate, is that people have value beyond just their work production. That we're people in addition to getting things done, and we have lives outside of work. And so it has to be about them as a person. It has to feel authentic. And as the 5 languages, indicate, that people feel appreciated in different ways. So not everybody likes words. Not everybody likes some kind of reward. And so we want to find out what is motivating or makes them feel valued and be able to communicate it in that way.
So this is a question that is taking, I was planning to ask it further along in the interview, but I can't wait. How do you detect appreciation language at a specific person? It can be about employee, it can be about your volunteer. This is something that I really puzzling. So
yeah, it is difficult because at least in the majority U.S. culture, and I can't speak for the Israeli culture or others, but to ask somebody how they like to be shown appreciation is just a weird question.
Definitely.
and also they're going to basically say, I don't know, tell me thanks. I mean, that's sort of what you're going to get. And
it's
so
even hard to answer. Yeah, it's even hard to answer yourself. You don't know that about yourself so much. Yeah.
Exactly. And so, I mean, this can sound self-serving, but to this point, I haven't found any other way than for people to take our inventory, where we give different options that people can choose between, whether it's time or acts of service, tangible gifts, and so forth. And what we found was that not only finding their language is important, but the specific actions within the language, because somebody can have quality time. And in fact, I had a manager say, well, what does that mean? What am I supposed to do? And so we created another component of the inventory that identifies their specific actions, because some people would like individual time with their supervisor or manager to talk about things or share, or they just feel valued because they're choosing to spend time with them, while a lot of people don't. I've had a number of often women say, I don't want individual time with my supervisor. He's pretty intense and I'm sort of shy, and no, thank you, but I'd love to go hang out with my friends. And they like to go out for lunch or go out afterwards after work. And so there's not really any good way to find out, except the only way that I know sort of a side door is appreciation and encouragement are very similar. And appreciation, in my mind, is for the past. We appreciate somebody for the past. Encouragement is about the present and future. So you could ask somebody, when you're discouraged, what's something that somebody can do or has done that's encouraged you? Mm-hmm. You may get there a little bit, but again, sort of the repertoire is going to be fairly small, and that's where I think the inventory gives, a fuller sense of what people want. And also they can identify from whom, because they may want to hang out with their friends, but they're not going to get together to watch a sporting event with their supervisor. Sure. Sometimes.
Yeah. I really like the fact that you wrote it in the book that you can learn how to detect the language of appreciation by witnessing what kind of languages of appreciation this person provides. Maybe this is something this is to what I understood. So please.
Yeah, so you can, but there's two problems with it. One, you don't have a lot of data points to observe, right? As far as how many times people are showing appreciation. And secondly, we found in some little pilot studies we've done that about 75% of the time people share appreciation in the way that's meaningful to them, but about 25% of the time they don't. And that's especially true with gifts. A lot of people like to give gifts, but getting a gift isn't as important. So you can try that, but it can be challenging.
I'm glad I asked.
I think that one of the most interesting, sectors that you are dealing with also, and we are dealing with intensively, is the non-profit sector. And I think that we are looking at professionals who their career is in the non-profit sector. And we're looking at the lay leaders or the volunteer leadership. We are motivated by, different kinds of motivations and values. And, if you can speak a little bit about what's the difference when you're motivating volunteer leadership or motivating professionals working for nonprofit?
Yeah, great question. It depends somewhat on the level of the volunteer. And from what I gathered from some of the information you all shared, I mean, some of the people that volunteer for you are very high level professionals who have maybe done well in their career and now are, offering their time and expertise. That's very different than somebody who is, coming and doesn't have that kind of experience and is offering more of a baseline kind of service. But in any case, the principle is always the same, and it's appreciation is person to person. And I think nonprofits especially make mistakes. They try well, they try hard, to show appreciation for the people that have helped make them successful and serve. But if you do it as an organization to a person, it feels organizational, right, versus personal. So it's an okay place to start, but that doesn't really get to sort of grabbing their heart. Whereas if you or whoever their supervisor or has worked with them on a team communicates appreciation to them directly, personally, that's going to be far more impactful. And so, one way of showing recognition, at least, and sometimes appreciation is like an award or like volunteer of the year and that kind of stuff at maybe a banquet or something. And it's a good thought, but, about half of the population are introverts, okay? And so there are some people that just don't like that. In fact, every time I speak or do training, I ask, how many of you really would prefer not to go up in front of a large group to, be recognized or, get some appreciation? Consistently, about 40% of the population don't. And if you take it out, administrative assistants and so forth, they're more like 60%. Librarians, not necessarily volunteers, but they're like 90%. And then you have high-performing professionals. They're like, where's the TV and camera? Bring it on. And they're often sometimes the ones that are designing the program, and they don't realize. I had a woman who said, yeah, I got the award, but I spent the 15 minutes prior to getting the award in the bathroom throwing up. She was so nervous and didn't want to do it. And so it wasn't a positive experience for her. And so in the training we talk about different reasons why people don't like that and how you can manage anxiety. Because sometimes, it is a public PR kind of thing, and that's okay. But I would say it's really important to try to keep it personal. And so the languages are the same, whether it's words or time or an act of service. Now, I was thinking about higher level professionals and volunteers, because I've worked with very successful family businesses and family foundations, and so sort of have, been in that realm some. And I know that a lot of those people don't want public recognition. I mean, they're okay with it, but that's not what really motivates them. But when they hear about the impact of what they've done in people's lives, right?
Individually.
That's very individually, or a family. It's very meaningful to them. And so we know that words, we've had 165,000 or so take our inventory. Words is the most frequently used language in the workplace. It's about 45% of people cite that as their primary language. But the way to make that meaningful is to really take some time and think about what it is that you value about them, and be able to communicate that in a way that's, thorough, versus, hey, thanks for all your help. What does that mean? And so the more specific you can get, the better. It feels more authentic to them if you can cite, for all your time that you spent visiting these different, inner city, boys and girls clubs or whatever it might be. And so there's not that much difference, except for the issue is, how do you find out sort of what's meaningful to them and be able to communicate that in a personal way versus organizational.
I just thought of something. It's not in the script that we have, or the bank of questions. What happens if you, as an employer, as someone who is about to manage or lead people, and you identify a certain language that is the right language for someone in your team, and you feel uncomfortable providing them?
Yes, well, and that's not an uncommon experience. In fact, when people take our assessment, we identify their primary language that they prefer, their secondary, and then their least valued language, which we call their blind spot. It's the one you don't think about because it's not that important to you, and it can have some discomfort. I mean, it'd be like maybe quality time for somebody who is shy and introvert. And I guess the point I make to leaders, at least, is that if you're going to lead successfully, you have to learn how to lead people who are different than you. Otherwise, you just have a bunch of little mini-yous following you around, and you may be good and great, but you need different kinds of people, both skill-wise, personality-wise, motivation-wise. So that would be a growth area for a person, right? It's not like you really enjoy it or whatever, but you know that that is meaningful to them. And so whether that's, you find maybe an act of service of that they like to do, like my wife is a twin, okay? And so she likes to do things with people rather than alone. I'm sort of like, if we have projects, it's like, you do this, I'll do this, we'll meet at the end and go. But that's not how she wants to do it, right? She wants to, we'll cut the vegetables together for dinner. And so even though that may not feel efficient to you, if that's your perspective, that makes that person feel valued. And I think that's an important point that I've learned. I struggled for a while, say, if you don't feel like there are people that are difficult to appreciate, and if you don't appreciate them, what do you do? I mean, can you just sort of, try to I'm going to appreciate, Bob, even though I don't know what he does and I don't like him, and what I realize is appreciation comes out of a sense of value, that we value the other person. And it can be what they do. Like I have a team member that's, helps us out with technology issues, and I'm really thankful for his skill that way. But sometimes it's even personal characteristics. It's not, and that's one of the cool things, difference between appreciation and recognition. Recognition really is about performance and getting things done. Appreciation is about the person. And so sometimes, most employee recognition programs focus on the top 10 to 15% of performers. Well, that leaves your big middle group of, 50% that are good people. They show up, but they don't hear anything because they're not at your star. But you can find things that they do, whether it's that they're dependable or, they're a good listener, but even non-work related, like I personally like to work with cheerful people more than grumpy people. And so, it could be somebody that, just has a nice smile, a fun laugh, and you say, you brighten up the room when you come in, and I really value that. Or it can even be outside of work, and this can be important with volunteers. It's like, the example that I often use is somebody that's maybe training for like a triathlon, like you do, and say, wow, that is so cool that you have the discipline to do that, and it's not about work, but it's attributing value, and say, I just acknowledge your self-discipline there. Or you working with someone who, maybe has some health challenges, but they continue to be faithful and show up and get things done and say, I know you don't always feel well, but you come and you give in spite of that. And so I think being able to sort of grow, but it is a growth area for us sometimes. And I know there's some people that we work with introverts. It's not always that you have to tell somebody face to face, but with introverts, maybe you write a note or you write an email, so you have a little more distance to think about it, and provides a little more comfort that way.
I think being aware to the 5 languages of appreciation brings some kind of intimacy to the workplace. It takes intimacy for me to pay attention to those things with my team, and to approach it and to address it and to compliment or whatever it takes. So I feel it's making me be more aware and more, present as a manager. That's something that is really interesting that I experience.
Yeah, that's a great observation, Dana, because it is about the person, right? And so, we have snacks or do lunch or whatever. Well, if you buy pizza or sandwiches, but you observe what each person likes, and so you make sure that you get that kind. Or in our office, we like chocolate, and some people like dark chocolate, and some people like milk chocolate. And so you get to know the person and reflect that in what you do. And that's important in the area of gifts, because we actually found that the language that's most important to a person is also the language they're most easily offended in. It's sort of like that channel is important to them. So people for whom words is important, they're more sensitive to criticism. And so you have to sort of frame that a little bit. The way you offend people who value gifts is to give everybody the same thing, because for them, it's about knowing them and being personal. And so you find out what they like. Now, my team doesn't know this yet, but we're going to have a Christmas luncheon, and I got T-shirts for all of them. But I got T-shirts, sort of funny T-shirts that reflect something about each of their lives, right? So it's sort of the same thing, but it's individualized. And so that's really important when you give gifts in work relationships.
Yeah, that sounds a great solution. So to our understanding, languages of appreciation are individual and not about are personal and not generational.
Correct.
But we would like to speak about millennials.
Okay.
Because millennials are
for the next 5 hours.
Yes, for the next 500 years. Millennials are now officially the largest generation represented in the workforce, holding a key managerial positions in both the business and the nonprofit sector. And millennials are associated with high level of turnover. So that brought us to the question. Turnover used to be a sign of a bad sign. It used to be a sign of people not feeling appreciated or not happy with their job, and or maybe the job is not good enough, and it used to be a very bad sign. And now we feel like we might need to change the way we think about turnover. But then I guess we are facing this question, and I think that the organization that we are consulting to are facing the same questions. How to deal with millennials? Do they have a specific language of appreciation that they are more, sensitive to, or as a generation, or is it? Please help us.
Yeah. Okay. I'll try. So here's the theme. Millennials are people, right? And they're individual persons. And so while we have to talk about groups of
my
people,
theory about millennials as aliens just falls.
So we cluster people that have similar characteristics, but within that group, people have differences, right? So I think the first warning is not necessarily to think about them as millennials, but to think about Stephanie or Sophie or whomever as a person, right? And get to know them. Having said that, we know that because we did some research that was published this last year on millennials and how they like to be shown appreciation, that in one sense, they're largely the same as everybody else, that words are the most frequently desired. And obviously, the more specific you can be, the better. But the language that changed was, and often quality time and acts of service are sort of almost tied for second, okay? And then gifts is low, and then physical touch we sort of deal with differently. But with millennials, quality time goes up significantly higher than acts of service. But here's the deal for leaders and managers, especially for those of us who are older. Just because they won't indicate quality time doesn't mean they want time with you, okay? So sometimes we say, oh, how am I going to have time for this or whatever? Hey, they don't necessarily want time with you. You might be great, but they're not looking for that. What's important to millennials is to have time with their peers and their colleagues. And so, in fact, my team, they scheduled a party and didn't invite me. How can that be? I'm a
What about your language of appreciation?
Mine is words. Yeah, but that was fine because they wanted time together, And so I think we have to understand that there's that part. And, in the old days, hang with me, I'm going to tie this in. In the old days, people would leave. There was a saying, people don't leave a job, they leave a supervisor, or a manager or a boss. That's still true to some degree, but less true for younger workers. Because if they have good collegial relationships with their peers and a not so good relationship with their supervisor, the collegial one will trump the other. I mean, it's like it's more important to them. And so it's more about those peer relationships. And so in our training, we actually used to focus on managers and supervisors. And we learned that it's really important for people to learn how to communicate appreciation to one another, not just top down. And so quality time is important, but it's peers more than higher level people necessarily. Besides that, they're pretty much the same, except as far as appreciation goes, except for this also. Well, let me say this. I think often, because I was working with a large company and they had a call center where people would call in for customer service, and they had some really difficult relationships between generations. And they said, we have these generational conflicts. And so I went in and looked and talked to the people, found out that most of them really weren't generational. They either were just regular issues, not feeling respected or trusted or whatever, wrapped a little bit differently, but also they were more related to life stage. I think sometimes we attribute generation things to life stage. For example, if you have a 25-year-old young man who's single, lives in an apartment with some other guys, works for you, his lifestyle and values are probably quite different than a 25-year-old young man who's married and has a little infant baby. Same generation, same age, different life stage. Yeah. And so what's important to them is different. And so I think we have to, and then what's happening actually as Gen Xers get older, or even older millennials, they're moving into different life stages and they're not thinking and feeling the same as they were, 5 to 7 years ago. So so I think we have to sometimes reframe it, not so much as how old they are, what generation, but what life stage are they in. But I would say this, that we do know that around like the turnover, I would agree that it's less concerning to them to change a job clearly every 2 years. That's sort of normal. I mean, right? Now, if you have somebody hop in every 4 months, that's different, unless they have a really good reason for it. But they are more short-term thinking. And so, and I have 4 adult children, and 2 of them are 35 now, and they're sort of just on the edge of being millennials, and then the other 3s are. But in talking, it's less about like long-term, like what we used to call golden handcuffs, where you would sort of give them rewards for staying a long-term. That's not going to happen. It has to be shorter term, 2 to 3, maybe 5 years at the most. But they get present feedback and rewards, if you will, rather than long-term kinds of things. And I guess let me just say this, and then I'll let you guys follow up with some questions. The key thing for younger workers is less about what you do and more about when. Meaning, if you're going to give them feedback, you need to give them feedback within the first 24 to 48 hours. Otherwise, you sort of moved into history. If you refer back to something that's 6 months ago, that's like, they don't even remember it, right?
Yeah. Who was it?
So you have to give them more immediate kinds of feedback because that's sort of how their culture runs, right? And so we have to deal with that.
So instead of having a twice a year feedback conversation, then maybe with millennials we should, a company should move to a more frequent feedback conversation, for example, now that I'm thinking about it. Do you think an appreciation language is something that is changing when someone's life, or is it the same as?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say we don't know for sure. Dr. Chapman, with the love languages, firmly believes that your love language, your base love language, stays the same over time. You may sort of change a little bit for a little while and go back. My sense is that similarly, you have sort of a base appreciation language that you may change. We do know that your language can change in certain situations. When you're under stress, personally, often quality time and acts of service rise because, at least in our culture in the U.S., that's how people show care and concern, is that they'll spend time with you or, offer to run errands or pick up the kids after work or whatever. And so that's sort of an enculturated kind of thing. And then when the stressful event goes away, it goes back down. I also tend to think, just from my own personal experience, that your language can change over sort of your career and life stage because, when I was younger, we had twin sons. I was a graduate student. We didn't have much money. And so, going out to something for dinner for just a little nicer was really nice. Yeah. Well, I travel now and eat out a lot. So it's like, that doesn't really get it for me. And the same thing I think happens for words for some people, that they get sort of satiated about that. So we're actually planning a research study to compare people that have taken our inventory and have them retake it and see how that goes. But I think there's sort of a baseline, but it's not hard and fast for sure.
I'm curious to see the result of this research. So, let me gather my thought for a second, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So I'll ask something that came in my mind. It's like, we often speak about organizational culture. So you identify, a workplace by its culture. What are the changes in the ability of any leader or any manager to actually lead organizational culture when you need to make so many adjustments and so many moving parts within a culture? The whole concept of organizational culture is that people know what to do because that's how we do things.
Right.
And if that's not relevant anymore, we do things that will meet your language and will meet you in the right place, and you'll get the right feedback that is meeting you. It's like, what's the deal? So how organization shifts towards that kind of totally diverse and almost structured.
Yeah. So there's lots of different levels of organizational culture as far as structure and so forth. But when people talk to me about it, it's often sort of, the milieu of it. I mean, what does it feel like and the interactions and so forth. And I find that people attribute culture too much to being external from them, that there is this culture and it's out there and I'm not really part of it. Whereas reality is that kind of culture, at least, is really the culmination or accumulation of hundreds or thousands of interactions between individuals, right? And so the way that it changes, and this is what has been cool about applying our appreciation concepts to different workplaces, is that anybody can start wherever they are. They don't have to be at the top of the organization. In fact, rarely do we start at the top. We're often brought into the middle of maybe a manager or a supervisor that wants to work on their team, and then we work with them, and then it sort of grows and goes viral. So I always encourage people, start where you are and start to apply the concepts with someone, okay? Because if you don't start with someone, you're not going anywhere, right? It's sort of like, if you never take the first step on a journey, you don't go. And so, and then if you can have colleagues or team members that will come with you, then you start to have some more power and influence. So I encourage people not to necessarily try to think about changing the whole big structure or culture, but just their daily interactions, because then it grows from there. And clearly you can hit a wall, and there are some situations where there's a department or a division that they're doing this and they're actually doing quite well. And the rest of the company is not, and because you can't make people do it, right? And so it's do what you can where you are, and over time, generally I find that it goes well, at least to a small degree.
I think I'm relating to what Amit is asking, because it's working with either with staff or with lay leaders, for example. We need to, for one hand, to set some kind of demand level, and we have criteria that we want to stand by, and then on the other hand, we want to make them feel appreciated. And I can imagine I don't need to imagine, I was there, but executive director that working with the board of director in a nonprofit. So on one hand, this board of director is the one that is deciding whether this executive director will have his position.
Yes.
So he is the supervisor, or he is the manager, he's the superior. Right. But then on the other hand, the executive director needs to engage a lay leader and have them involved as much as possible, and to go through the process of becoming more and more professional and involved in the organization again. And so how do you show appreciation to someone that is superior to you and having this kind of maybe complicated relationship with?
Yeah. Let me make one side comment related to what you were saying. I'm from what we call the Midwest in the United States, and we're known to just tell it like it is. So I'm going to just tell you that I have found board of directors of nonprofits to be the most difficult group to work with in this area, and it's not all necessarily their fault. I mean, they're usually volunteers, they're busy professionals or have busy lives, and so this is sort of extra in their life. But man, they just do not give any kind of, in my experience, much support or encouragement to the executive director or maybe the management team. And so this team is sort of dying on the vine, and the board of directors is not sort of really supporting in an encouraging way. And so it's challenging. I have one of our trained facilitators works with boards and does this as part of working with boards to train them. So hopefully we'll see some gain there. But in any kind of situation where you're talking about maybe, trying to relate to your supervisor, manager, boss, whatever, there can be, a sense of, are you trying to, get in good with them and get favors or manipulate them or whatever, and which addresses the issue of authenticity, right? And so we really hammer in our training the issue of authentic appreciation, that I'm not here to try to teach you how to look like you appreciate somebody or go through the motions. Either you do or you don't. And in fact, the follow-up book that I wrote that came out this last year called The Vibrant Workplace, and it's overcoming the obstacles to the most common challenges of creating a culture of appreciation, identified the 10 most common challenges and how to get past it, because it's not easy. If it was easy, everybody would be doing it, right? But it's about authenticity, and it's about a relationship. And so authenticity is basically proved over time, right? And so that if you try to communicate appreciation to your director or supervisor and other people question it, you just sort of have to keep going, right? And do it in a meaningful way. Make sure that you're specific. It's not like, oh, you're the greatest boss ever, that kind of stuff. But hey, thank you for, giving us, an extra half day off for this holiday, and so I could spend time with my family or whatever it is. And again, it's about being personal rather than organizational. And, if you're around authentic people, they win you over, right? And so it's more about us, I think, and trying, and you have to be, mindful of sort of traps or pitfalls to get into a perception. But it's okay to do that. And in fact, leaders of organizations often are sometimes the most discouraged, right? I work with a lot of family-owned businesses that, the CEO is like, they only mainly hear complaints or demands, and they need support. And that's, again, to me, the fun thing about appreciation is it doesn't have to be the people right underneath them. It can be their assistant. It could be the receptionist and say, hey, Mr. Smith, thanks so much for whatever it is. And so we empower people to be able to make a difference in the relationships that they have.
That's really inspiring. Mm-hmm. And I think it's very helpful in what we do. So, do you have... I have a lot to digest after.
Yeah, we have a lot to digest. I will just try to, last final question. And again, thank you for your time.
Sure.
Is there do you see a significant or meaningful difference between the non-profit sector to the for-profit sector? Is there something from your experience that you see as something a big thing?
Yeah. So let me define that a little bit. I'm going to talk about staff and employees because volunteers really are sort of a different kind of thing. Absolutely. But as far as staff between the two, at the bottom line, no, because basically everybody would like to feel valued and appreciated. Yeah. And unfortunately, most people don't, the research shows. And so because either we don't do it or we get focused on the task or we try and we're doing it in the wrong way. But we have to remember people want to feel valued. They want to know, what they do is valued, but also them as a person. Not everybody feels valued in the same ways, so we have to figure out how they feel appreciated, and that it's not just top down. And those principles work anywhere, right? Collegial, authentic, in the ways that are meaningful to the people. And so I would say that the area where, at least for us, because we've created a nonprofit version of our inventory in the area of gifts, because in some nonprofits here, they're not allowed to give gifts or receive gifts, either among each other or whatever. And if you're serving the homeless and you get a $20 gift card to go someplace to dinner, that feels sort of weird anyway. So we retooled the action items within the gift language to fit the nonprofit sector here, so that there are things that can be done and given that don't create that kind of tension. But I would encourage, if people are interested to explore this, if they go to our website, Appreciation at Work, and it's the word appreciationatwork.com, we have, about our inventory and the book and training. But I'm excited, we work with all kinds of nonprofits from, schools and government agencies and inner city organizations and the Red Cross and all different kinds of things, and I'm pleased because I grew up professionally in the not-for-profit and social service world, and so it was important to me. They give a lot. People that work there give a lot. They don't get paid much. There's not much prestige, and there's not much money for training, right? And so that's why we created a low-cost training kit that people can get for their organization and use it within their organization so that they can learn how to, support and encourage one another.
I would like to recommend to all our listeners to use your book. It's really incredible and amazing, and it's a great tool. And now that and also the website and the tools that Dr. White just offered. So, do you have anything that you would like to add, Dr. White?
No, just thank you for the opportunity and thank you for what you all are doing, because nonprofits, they usually are birthed out of a passion that an individual or individuals have, and then they do the best they can. But then, just like businesses, they sort of hit a wall of complexity or whatever that they need help and training to get beyond so they can function well. So I'm really thankful that you guys are helping in that way.
Thank you very, very much. It was a pleasure having you here. And I would like to say thank you also for the listener for joining this podcast. Please let us know, what do you think? We would like to know. We want to hear from you, either in email or Facebook, or send us a pigeon. We would like to hear from you. Thank you very, very much again, Dr. White, and everyone. Enjoy your day.
Thank you very much.